She was baptized in bitterness on her very first day, not with water, but with iced coffee. In the gleaming, cathedral-like lobby of Stratos Dynamics, a privileged intern emptied his cup onto her. The cold shock, a prelude to the sneer that followed. "Oops," he drawled, his voice a lazy river of false apology and genuine contempt. "Thought you were with maintenance." The sticky, sweet liquid dripped from her hair, tracing cold paths down her neck and soaking the shoulder of her plain white blouse. Around her, a ripple of snickers swelled into a wave of open laughter. Evelyn Vance did not move. She did not flinch, did not gasp, did not even wipe the drop of coffee that clung precariously to the end of her nose. The world seemed to slow. The ambient hum of the lobby, the hushed typing from the reception desk, the whisper of automatic doors fading into a dull roar dominated by the sound of their amusement. The iced coffee, a cheap vanilla latte by the smell of it, felt like a violation, a cold, deliberate stain on her carefully constructed anonymity. It clung to her skin, a testament to the company's immediate verdict on her worth. The intern, Lachlan Croft was the name on his pristine lanyard, gave a final, dismissive flick of his wrist. He was the epitome of inherited confidence, from his slicked-back chestnut hair that seemed immune to gravity to the tailored lines of a blazer that likely cost more than her rent. A sliver of a ridiculously expensive-looking watch peeked from his cuff. He tossed the now empty plastic cup toward a marble waste receptacle without looking, missing by a good foot. It clattered against the polished floor, another piece of trash for someone else to clean up. It wasn't his problem. He turned to his friends, a small clique of equally polished young men and women who orbited him like moons around a gas giant. "Can you believe it? First day and the place is already crawling with strays. She looks like she just wandered in off the street," a young woman chimed in, her voice sharp and brittle. Aveline recognized her from the orientation packet. Sloane Davenport, a junior project manager known for her aggressive ambition. Sloane's eyes, the color of a winter sky, raked over Aveline's simple gray slacks and sensible flat shoes with undisguised disgust. The assessment was swift and brutal, unimportant. Aveline finally allowed herself a slow, deliberate blink. The drop of coffee fell from her nose and landed silently on the floor. Her eyes, a soft, steady hazel, remained fixed, not on Lachlan or Sloane, but scanning the wider crowd. She was a cartographer of cruelty, mapping the terrain of her new environment. She noted the faces that laughed the loudest, the ones who quickly looked away in discomfort but did nothing, and the few, the very few, who simply watched with unreadable expressions. Each reaction was a data point, a piece of the puzzle she had been sent here to solve. Her temporary trainee badge, a flimsy piece of plastic with her name printed in stark block letters, felt heavy against her chest. It was her shield and her magnifying glass, granting her access while simultaneously rendering her invisible. No one, in this temple of new money and cutthroat corporate climbing, would ever look twice at a trainee in a coffee-stained blouse. No one would guess that the name Vance was not just a name, but a dynasty. It was old power, the kind that didn't need to shout because its influence was woven into the very fabric of global commerce. The kind of power that owned buildings like this, not just worked in them. But here, she was just Aveline, a nobody. She had insisted on it. The European holding company, the silent parent of Stratos Dynamics, had agreed to her unusual request. "Go in blind," she had told the board. "Let me see the company for what it is, not what it pretends to be for the heiress. I need to see the rot before I can cut it out." And the rot, it seemed, was already presenting itself. It smelled like cheap vanilla and entitlement. With a stillness that felt more unnerving than any outburst would have, Aveline shifted her weight. The faint squeak of her rubber-soled flats on the Italian marble was an alien sound in a room accustomed to the confident click of expensive heels and leather dress shoes. The laughter began to falter, sputtering out unevenly as her silence stretched. An awkward cough broke the tension. A few people shuffled their feet, suddenly very interested in their phones. Her gaze finally settled on Lachlan. She said nothing, not a word, but for a fleeting second, a muscle in her jaw tightened, a microscopic signal of the immense control she was exercising. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken challenge. Lachlan's smirk wavered, the bravado in his eyes replaced by a flicker of confusion. He had expected tears, or a stammered apology, or perhaps an angry retort he could easily swat down. He had not expected this silent, unnerving composure. He recovered quickly, puffing out his chest and sauntering off toward the artisan coffee bar, his clique trailing in his wake like pilot fish. Aveline stood alone for a moment more, a solitary figure in the vast, impersonal space. The lobby's towering glass walls reflected her silhouette against the backdrop of the Chicago skyline, a small, damp figure against a world of steel and ambition. Her blouse was ruined, clinging uncomfortably to her skin. Her slacks, pulled from the back of a closet in a guest house she hadn't visited in years, suddenly felt a size too big. She looked exactly as she had intended, utterly forgettable. She finally moved, her steps measured and even, toward the main reception desk. It was a monolith of white marble and brushed steel, manned by a receptionist whose perfectly manicured nails clicked on her keyboard with an air of profound boredom. "Excuse me," Aveline said, her voice quiet but clear. The receptionist didn't look up. One moment. The clicking continued for another 30 seconds, a petty display of power. Finally, she lifted her eyes, her expression a carefully constructed mask of disinterest. "Yes? I'm here for the new hire orientation. My name is Aveline Vance. I believe it's in conference room 3B. The receptionist's eyes flicked down to Aveline's coffee-stained blouse, and a tiny, cruel smile touched the corners of her lips. She tapped a few keys. "Vance, trainee, temporary." She pronounced the words as if they were a diagnosis of a terminal illness. "Orientation started 10 minutes ago. You're late, and you have something on you." "There was a spill," Aveline said evenly, offering no further explanation. "Right. Well, 3B is on the 3rd floor. But the elevators are prioritized for executives during peak hours. You're not an executive." The receptionist's smile widened slightly. "You'll probably have to wait. Over there." She gestured vaguely with a perfectly lacquered fingernail toward a waiting area, with chairs that looked more like art installations than functional furniture. It was another test, another small humiliation designed to reinforce the hierarchy. Aveline knew the company's internal charter by heart. She had helped write the updated version. There was no such thing as elevator prioritization. It was a fiction created by the employees themselves to feel important. "Thank you," Aveline said, her tone giving nothing away. She turned from the desk, ignoring the hard, uncomfortable chairs. She saw a sign for the stairwell and began walking toward it. Let them have their elevators. Stairs were more direct. They also offered solitude, a moment to reset and analyze. As she walked, she felt the stairs on her back. The whispers followed her, trailing like smoke. "Did you see that?" Lachlan totally owned her. "What is she even wearing? Did HR lower their standards? She won't last a week." The words were meant to sting, to wound, but to Aveline, they were merely confirmation. They confirmed the sickness she had suspected ran deep within Stratos dynamics. It was a culture of arrogance, of exclusion, built on a foundation of judging books by their covers. They saw a plain woman in cheap clothes and saw a target. They couldn't see the mind behind the eyes, a mind that was already cross-referencing names with departmental budgets, performance reviews, and complaint logs stored securely on her private server. She pushed open the heavy door to the stairwell, the sterile, concrete echo, a welcome relief from the lobby's charged atmosphere. The door clicked shut behind her, muffling the whispers and the judgment. She was alone. She leaned against the cool concrete wall for a moment, closing her eyes. She wasn't thinking about the humiliation. She was thinking about her grandfather, the man who had built the Vance empire from nothing. He had a saying, "When you want to know the character of a house, don't talk to the master. Talk to the mice in the walls. They see everything." She was the mouse. And she was seeing everything. With a deep breath, Aveline pushed herself off the wall. She didn't bother trying to clean the coffee stain. Let them see it. Let it be a part of her disguise. It was a brand, of sorts. The mark of the unimportant woman, the one nobody paid attention to. Her hand rested for a moment on the worn strap of her simple leather bag. Tucked inside, past a paperback novel and a bottle of water, was a slim, encrypted tablet. On it was a direct link to the global chairman of the parent company. On it was the authority to fire every single person she had just encountered in the lobby, from Lachlan Croft to the receptionist at the marble desk. But that wasn't her way. Firing them would be easy. It would be a purge, not a cure. Her mission was more complex. She had to understand the system that created and rewarded people like Lachlan and Sloan. She had to identify the cracks in the foundation before she could begin to rebuild. She began to climb the stairs, her steps steady and rhythmic. One flight, then two. The physical exertion was grounding, clearing her head. With each step, the sting of the public humiliation faded, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. They had mistaken her quietness for weakness. They had mistaken her simplicity for poverty. They had made their assessment based on the most superficial of criteria, and in doing so, had revealed everything about themselves and nothing about her. As she reached the third-floor landing, she paused. She could hear the faint murmur of the office beyond the door. She smoothed down her damp blouse, a futile gesture, and squared her shoulders. Her expression was neutral, her eyes calm. The first day was far from over. Her investigation had only just begun. She pushed the door open and stepped into the heart of the company she was about to turn upside down. The wolf had entered the sheep pen, and the sheep were too busy laughing at her plain, coffee-stained coat to notice her teeth. The third-floor office was a world away from the sterile grandeur of the lobby. Here, the calculated chaos of a modern tech firm reigned. Glass-walled offices lined the perimeter, offering a voyeuristic glimpse into the lives of senior management. The open-plan floor was a sprawling landscape of ergonomic chairs, dual-monitor setups, and the low, persistent hum of human ambition. It was a space designed to foster collaboration and transparency, yet the air felt thick with unspoken rivalries and carefully guarded secrets. Aveline pushed through the door, marked 3B, and slipped into the back of the conference room. The orientation was already in full swing. A painfully enthusiastic HR representative with a razor-sharp haircut was pointing at a slide titled Stratos Dynamics, a synergy of innovation. About 20 other new hires, mostly interns and junior associates, were seated around a long, polished table. "Ah, Miss Vance, you've decided to join us," the HR rep said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The presentation paused. 20 heads turned to look at her. Their gazes fell instantly to the dark, ugly stain blooming across her blouse. A few of them, friends of Lachlan's from the lobby, exchanged smirks. Lachlan himself, seated near the front, gave a theatrical sigh of exasperation. "My apologies for the delay," Aveline said, her voice betraying no hint of embarrassment. "I was detained downstairs." "I see," the rep said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Well, try to keep up. Find a seat." The only available chair was at the far end of the table, isolated from the main group. As she made her way to it, the other interns subtly shifted their chairs, their body language creating an invisible wall. It was a classic, juvenile display of social exclusion, executed with the practiced ease of adults. Aveline sat down, opened the generic notebook provided, and uncapped a pen, her focus absolute. She was not there to make friends. For the next hour, she listened. She absorbed the company's official narrative, a slickly produced tale of disruption, teamwork, and market dominance. But she paid closer attention to the subtext. She watched who whispered to whom, who checked their phone when the talk turned to corporate ethics, who asked intelligent questions, and who asked questions designed only to make themselves sound intelligent. During the first scheduled break, the group migrated to the nearby break room. It was another shrine to modern corporate culture, with a high-end espresso machine, glass-fronted refrigerators stocked with flavored sparkling water, and a long counter laden with complimentary snacks. Aveline, wanting only a glass of tap water, found herself cornered near the sink. One of Lachlan's acolytes, a young man with more gel in his hair than sense in his head, leaned against the counter, blocking her path. "Tough first day, huh?" he asked, his grin wide and predatory. "You know, we have a dress code here. I don't think disaster area is on the approved list." His friend snickered. A young woman with immaculate nails and a cruel smile pulled out her phone. "Hold still," she said, the flash glinting off Aveline's tired eyes. "This is going straight to the Intern Fails group chat. Caption: Thrift store chic meets Jackson Pollock." Evelyn's hand, which had been reaching for a paper towel to discreetly blot her blouse, paused midair. Her shoulders stiffened, the only outward sign of the insult landing. She slowly lowered her hand and turned her full attention to the group. Her gaze, clear and unwavering, locked onto the young man with the gelled hair. "Is that all you have?" she asked. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it sliced through the break room chatter like a surgeon's scalpel. The room fell silent. The young man's grin faltered. He opened his mouth, fumbling for a witty comeback, but none came. He had expected her to be flustered, to blush, to stammer. He was not prepared for the quiet, piercing intensity of her gaze, which seemed to see right through his bravado to the insecurity beneath. Before he could recover, Evelyn had sidestepped him and walked out of the room, leaving her glass of water and his ego behind on the counter. Her next task, according to the orientation schedule, was to retrieve a set of onboarding documents from the Human Resources Department on the 5th floor. She headed for the main elevator bank, the same one from which she'd been dismissed earlier. As if summoned by fate, the doors of an arriving elevator slid open to reveal Sloane Davenport, standing alone inside. Sloane's eyes narrowed as she saw Evelyn approach. She deliberately stepped forward, partially blocking the entrance, and pressed the door close button. "Excuse me," Sloane said, her voice loud enough for several nearby employees to hear. "This bank of elevators is for staff, not temps on errands. Company policy." She gestured down the hall with her chin. "The service lift is that way. I'm sure you'll find it. More your speed." The doors began to slide shut, framing Sloane's triumphant, condescending smirk. Evelyn didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, turned on her heel, and walked away. From the corner of her eye, she saw the elevator doors close, and through the glass walls of the hallway, she saw a flicker of something in Sloane's expression, not just victory, but a hint of frustration. Evelyn's refusal to be baited had robbed her of the full satisfaction of her power play. As Evelyn walked toward the stairwell for the second time that day, her steps echoing in the suddenly quiet corridor, she noticed a woman standing by a large potted ficus. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s, with a sharp, silver bob that looked both elegant and severe. She wore a simple but exquisitely cut gray dress, and her arms were crossed as she watched the entire exchange at the elevator. It was Helena Roth, a name Evelyn knew well from the company's org chart. A senior advisor to the CEO, Helena had been with Stratos Dynamics since its inception, a living repository of its history and its secrets. Her eyes, unlike the others, were not dismissive or amused. They were analytical, like a jeweler assessing a stone for its flaws and its fire. When her gaze met Evelyn's, there was no pity. There was only a flicker of something that looked like recognition. Not of Evelyn Vance, the heiress, but perhaps of a kindred spirit, another observer in a room full of performers. The moment passed in a heartbeat, and Helena turned and walked away down a different corridor. Evelyn filed the observation away. The afternoon wore on, a slow marathon of petty indignities. During a team-building exercise, she was consistently the last one picked. When a senior strategist with a booming voice and a penchant for name-dropping needed coffee, he didn't ask, he commanded. He spotted Evelyn standing quietly at the edge of the group, tossed a crumpled $20 bill at her feet, and barked, "You, trainee, venti latte, extra foam, non-fat. And be quick about it. You're not paid to stand around." The room erupted in a fresh wave of snickers. Phones were already emerging, ready to capture the moment. Evelyn looked down at the bill on the floor, then lifted her eyes to meet his. She didn't bend down. She didn't touch the money. "I don't drink coffee," she said, her voice quiet but carrying a strange finality. Then, she turned and walked back to her designated seat, leaving the strategist red-faced and sputtering, the $20 bill lying on the floor like a shed skin. A quiet young man from the IT department, who had been tasked with setting up their laptops, later slipped the bill into his pocket, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. The day was almost over when Evelyn found herself in a quiet, less trafficked hallway on the executive floor, having been sent on one last pointless errand to deliver a stack of signed non-disclosure agreements. She was walking past a series of private offices when a calm, low voice spoke her name. Aveline Vance? She turned. It was Helena Roth. The senior advisor had emerged silently from her own office. The hallway was empty. For the first time, they were alone. Yes? Aveline replied, her guard subtly raised. Helena's sharp eyes took in Aveline's still damp blouse, her weary posture, and the calm defiance that had not wavered all day. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming a private hypothesis. Without another word, she stepped forward and handed Aveline a thick, heavy folder. It was bound in dark blue cardboard, and stamped across the front in stark red ink were 2 words, Top Secret. A direct message from the board, Helena said, her voice barely above a whisper, though there was no one to overhear. You are to review the restructuring blueprint before tonight's closed-door meeting. Your input is expected. A nearby office door opened, and a junior analyst with a tie pulled too tight and nervous eyes stepped out. He overheard Helena's last words and froze, his eyes wide. Wait, what? What meeting? Who? He stammered, looking from the formidable Helena to the disheveled trainee. Aveline took the folder. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like the weight of careers, of futures, of the entire company's destiny. Her fingers were steady as they closed around the cover. She looked at Helena, and for a moment, the mask of the meek trainee slipped. Her hazel eyes held a depth and authority that belied her appearance. She gave Helena a small, grateful nod. No explanation was offered. No questions were asked. Thank you, Helena, she said quietly. The analyst's jaw dropped. The use of the senior advisor's first name, the casual acceptance of a top-secret document it didn't compute. But Aveline was already walking away, the folder tucked securely under her arm, leaving both Helena and the bewildered analyst in her wake. She walked not to the stairs, but to the main elevator bank. She pressed the call button. As she waited, she caught her reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors. She saw a young woman with tired eyes and messy hair, her cheap blouse ruined by a coffee stain. A woman who looked powerless, insignificant, and utterly defeated. But clutched in her hand was a document that held the power to shatter this entire glass kingdom. The doors slid open, and this time, no one was there to stop her as she stepped inside. The company mixer was in full swing, a carefully orchestrated cacophony of self-congratulation. Held in a sprawling lounge on the top floor with panoramic views of the city lights, the event was a reward for a successful quarter. Wine flowed freely, music pulsed from hidden speakers, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and feigned camaraderie. The company's elite circulated, their laughter too loud, their handshakes too firm. Aveline stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of still water in her hand, the blue folder from Helena tucked safely away in her simple leather bag. She was an island of stillness in a turbulent sea of networking. From her vantage point, she watched the power dynamics play out in their rawest form. She saw junior associates fawning over department heads, their smiles strained with ambition. She saw managers clustering together, their conversation a low murmur of gossip and strategy, and she saw Lachlan Croft and Sloane Davenport holding court near the open bar. They were a magnetic duo of arrogance. Lachlan, his tie loosened, was recounting a story, punctuating it with loud, braying laughs that made heads turn. Sloane stood beside him, a glass of champagne in her hand, her posture radiating a queenly disdain for anyone outside their charmed circle. They were intoxicated, not just by the wine, but by their own perceived importance. It was inevitable that their attention would turn to her. Lachlan spotted Aveline across the room, and a slow, malicious grin spread across his face. He nudged Sloane, whispered something in her ear, and they both laughed. He set down his empty wine glass, picked up a fresh, full plastic cup of dark, bubbling soda from the bar, and began to make his way toward her. The crowd parted for him as if he were royalty. Aveline saw him coming. She didn't move, didn't brace herself. She simply watched him approach, her hazel eyes unreadable. This was the final piece of data she needed. This would be the unprovoked, public culmination of the day's hostilities. Well, look who's still here, Lachlan said, his voice slurring slightly. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could smell the sour hint of wine on his breath. I'm surprised you haven't been escorted out. I guess they let anyone linger for the free drinks. Sloane arrived a moment later, her smile coated in a venomous sweetness. Oh, Lachlan, be nice. She's probably just thirsty. It must be exhausting, doing whatever it is she does. Evelyn remained silent, her gaze fixed on Lachlan. Her silence was a vacuum, and his ego rushed to fill it. You know, he said, swirling the soda in his cup, that coffee stain from this morning is looking a little lonely. I think it needs a friend. And before she could move, before anyone could intervene, he tilted the cup. The dark, sticky liquid cascaded down, splashing across her face, soaking the front of her already stained blouse, and dripping from the ends of her hair onto the plush carpet. For a single, suspended moment, the room froze. The music seemed to dip. Then, the laughter came. It was sharper this time, crueler. It was the laughter of a mob, confident in its target. Looks like she's getting a full-service treatment today, someone shouted from the bar. Guess she's showcasing her adaptability, huh? Another voice added, followed by a fresh wave of snickers. Evelyn stood perfectly still, the cold soda dripping down her chin. Her eyes, stinging from the carbonation, did not blink. She didn't wipe her face. She didn't step back. She just looked at Lachlan, her gaze steady and unbroken. He laughed, but the sound was forced, hollow. He had wanted to see her break, to see her cry, to see her finally react like the victim he believed her to be. This unyielding composure was unnerving. He wasn't sure why, but he suddenly felt a chill, despite the warmth of the crowded room. It was at that precise moment that the main doors to the lounge swung open. The ambient chatter died as if a switch had been flipped. Julian Hayes, the CEO of Stratos Dynamics, strode into the room. He was a man in his early 40s with a sharp jawline, silvering temples, and a suit that looked like it had been tailored by architects. His presence commanded an immediate, almost fearful respect. Every eye turned to him. Julian's gaze swept across the room, and the silence deepened. He took in the scene with a swift, discerning glance, the nervous faces of his employees, the smug, laughing expressions of Lachlan and Sloane, and finally, the lone, drenched figure of Evelyn Vance standing by the window. A flicker of something unreadable, disappointment, anger, resolve crossed his face. Then he began to walk. He walked with a purpose that made the air crackle. He walked past his senior vice presidents, who straightened their ties and offered nervous smiles. He walked past the department heads, who quieted their conversations instantly. He walked directly toward the epicenter of the room's recent drama, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. He walked past Lachlan, whose triumphant grin froze and began to crumble. He walked past Sloane, whose champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. He stopped directly in front of Aveline. The entire company held its breath. They expected him to reprimand her, to ask what she was doing there, to have her removed. Lachlan prepared himself for a pat on the back for dealing with an intruder. What happened next defied all logic, all corporate hierarchy, all understanding. In the dead silent room, Julian Hayes, the CEO, the man whose decisions could make or break fortunes, bowed. It was not a quick, cursory nod of the head. It was a low, deliberate, and deeply respectful bow from the waist, the kind of gesture one might offer to royalty or a revered elder. A gesture of profound deference. A silent shockwave radiated outwards. Someone near the bar dropped a glass, the shatter echoing like a gunshot in the sudden void. Lachlan's face, which had been flushed with wine and victory, drained of all color, leaving a pasty, white mask of confusion and dawning horror. Sloane took an involuntary step back, her mouth falling open. Julian straightened up, his expression grim. He turned his gaze from Evelyn to the stunned, silent crowd. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room, each word perfectly enunciated and weighted with absolute authority. For those of you who have not had the privilege of a proper introduction, he began, his eyes scanning the sea of dumbfounded faces, this is the woman who has been sent by the board to personally lead our corporate restructure. A woman whose family's name has been synonymous with integrity and innovation for over a century. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then made a small, formal gesture toward the drenched, disheveled woman beside him. Everyone, he said, his voice ringing with chilling clarity, I would like you to meet the new chairwoman of Stratos Dynamics, Miss Aveline Vance. The name landed. For a terrifying second, there was only incomprehension. Then, recognition rippled through the executive ranks. Vance. Not a common name. It was the name. The Vance family. The quiet, colossally wealthy dynasty that owned the European holding company, which in turn owned Stratos Dynamics. It was a name that was whispered with awe in boardrooms across the globe. The world tilted on its axis. Every small act of cruelty, every snide comment, every condescending glance from the past 8 hours replayed in the minds of those present, now cast in a horrifying new light. The receptionist who had denied her the elevator, the strategist who had thrown money at her feet, the interns who had mocked her clothes, and at the center of it all stood Lachlan Croft, his phone slipping from his nerveless fingers and clattering onto the floor. He stared at Aveline, at the woman he had just doused in soda, and saw not a trainee, but the most powerful person in the building. He saw his future, once so bright and assured, imploding before his very eyes. Beside him, Sloane's face was a mask of abject horror. Her carefully constructed world of status and superiority had just been demolished. She looked at Aveline, who had not moved, whose expression had not changed, the soda still dripping from her hair like a dark, sticky crown. She was not smiling in triumph. She was not glaring in anger. She was simply watching them, her calm, steady gaze, the most terrifying thing Sloane had ever seen. The mouse had not just revealed herself to be a lion, she had revealed that she owned the entire jungle. The fallout was not a storm, it was a silent, surgical strike. The name Vance hung in the air, heavier and more potent than any formal declaration of power. The party was over. People dispersed in hushed, terrified clusters, avoiding eye contact with the woman they had spent the day tormenting. The music had long since died, leaving only the sound of a dropped fork or a nervous cough to punctuate the thick, anxious silence. Before anyone could formulate an apology or attempt a retreat, Julian Hayes spoke again, his voice cold and precise. "Security, please escort Mr. Croft and Miss Davenport to the HR office. They are to wait there." 2 stone-faced security guards, who had been standing discreetly by the entrance, moved forward with practiced efficiency. Lachlan was chalk white, his body trembling. "Mr. Hayes, sir, it was a misunderstanding, a joke," he stammered, his voice cracking. Sloane was frozen, her mind unable to process the sheer velocity of her downfall. She looked from Julian to Aveline, her eyes pleading. "Please, I didn't know." Julian's gaze was like ice. "That," he said, his voice dangerously low, "is precisely the problem." The guards flanked them, their presence non-negotiable. As they were led from the room, a pariah procession watched by dozens of wide eyes, Julian turned to his executive assistant. "Have the complete, unedited security footage from the lobby, the 3rd-floor break room, and this lounge sent to my office and to Miss Vance immediately, and assemble the entire board for an emergency meeting in 1 hour." He then turned to Avel Vanat. For the first time, a hint of something other than stern formality entered his expression, a deep, weary respect. "Chairwoman," he said, the title now landing with its full intended weight, "my office is at your disposal." Aveline finally moved. She gave a single, slow nod. She didn't look at the retreating forms of Lachlan and Sloane. Her judgment had already been passed. She walked away from the window, her soaked shoes squelching softly on the carpet, and followed Julian out of the lounge, leaving behind a room full of people to contemplate the ruins of their careers. The hours that followed were a blur of decisive action. In the emergency board meeting, Aveline sat at the head of the long mahogany table. She had not changed her clothes. The soda-stained blouse and damp hair served as a silent, powerful indictment of the company's culture. She didn't need to raise her voice. She laid out her findings from her single day of observation, her voice calm and measured, referencing specific incidents, names, and attitudes. The security footage played on a large screen behind her, each act of mockery and condescension unfolding in damning silence. The board members, grizzled veterans of industry, watched with expressions of grim horror. There was no defense. By sunrise, the purge was official. Lachlan Croft and Sloane Davenport were terminated for gross misconduct. The strategist who had thrown the $20 bill was fired. The HR representative who had belittled her, the receptionist who had lied about the elevators, and the interns who had taken her photo were all let go. The company-wide email announcing the immediate restructuring of key personnel was clinical and brutal. But Aveline's work was not purely destructive. Her true mission was to rebuild. The following week, a series of unexpected promotions rippled through the lower ranks of Stratos Dynamics. The quiet IT technician who had offered her a towel after the coffee incident found himself promoted to a team lead position. The junior designer who had offered her a genuine, welcoming smile in the hallway was called into a meeting with Aveline and asked to head a new creative initiative. The nervous analyst who had witnessed Helena give her the folder was made her personal aide, his integrity and discretion rewarded. She was building a new culture, not on resumes and Ivy League degrees, but on a foundation of simple human decency. During a quiet moment in that first week, Helena Roth entered Aveline's new office, the spacious corner suite that had once belonged to a now-departed executive. "I knew it the moment I saw you," Helena said, her voice holding a rare warmth. "You have your grandfather's eyes. He never tolerated bullies." Aveline looked up from a stack of reports, offering a small, tired smile. "He used to say that a company's character is defined by how it treats the person it thinks is least important." He was a wise man, Helena affirmed, and Stratos Dynamics had lost its character. "Welcome home, chairwoman." Ugh. The story of the new chairwoman who had been drenched in soda became a corporate legend, a modern-day fable whispered in break rooms and retold in emails. It served as a stark, chilling reminder: do not judge a book by its cover, for the cover might be a deliberate disguise. Weeks later, on a crisp autumn evening, Aveline stood on the rooftop terrace of the Stratos Dynamics building, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city. The wind was gentle, tugging at her hair, which she now wore loose around her shoulders. She wore a simple, elegant dark dress, but the change was not in her clothes. It was in the air around her. The deference she was now shown was absolute, but she carried her power with a quiet grace that discouraged sycophancy. The door to the terrace opened, and Julian Hayes stepped out, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to her. "To a new era at Stratos," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "To character," she replied, touching her glass to his. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city breathe below them. "They judged you your entire life, didn't they?" Julian asked quietly, not as a CEO to a chairwoman, but as one human being to another. "For being too quiet, too plain, too restrained, for not shouting about your own name." "Endo." Aveline took a slow sip of champagne, her gaze distant. She thought of the countless boardrooms where she had been overlooked, the social events where she had been dismissed, the endless assumptions made based on her unassuming demeanor. "I learned something very early on," she said, her voice soft but clear as the evening air. "You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to wear a crown to be a queen." She turned her steady hazel eyes to him, a profound and unshakable confidence radiating from within. "You just have to stand your ground. And when you do, with unwavering integrity, the world eventually has no choice but to adjust to you. It always does."